Is it recording? I think it is. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to my channel. My name is Mhara, and it's been a while, hasn't it? Hello, I'm back. How are we today? Today I wanted to have a little discussion with you, really. I wanted to talk about Welsh gods and goddesses and deities in general. I wanted to talk about deities in general. And this is going to be a very kind of relaxed chat and very much a discussion. I want to hear your thoughts about this topic as well. I think it's something that I want to hear a variety of opinions on. And that topic is, are the Welsh gods actually gods? And this is a big topic, and I'm not ready to talk about it. We're going to talk about it anyway. And I feel like a lot of people are going to watch this video and they're going to disagree with a lot of the things that I say, or they're not going to understand why I've said certain things. And I just wanted to put it out there. My opinion on this topic is not cemented. It's not something that is concrete. It is something that I'm still working on and still understanding. I mean, the concept of deities in general is still something that I'm working on. I'm still struggling with the concept of deity. Not struggling so much, but more exploring. I'm exploring my relationship with deity as a pagan, as a witch, as someone who practices witchcraft, and as someone who is a pagan. Who grew up in Wales. If you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Mhara. You might have seen me on TikTok. I've grown rather popular on there lately.
So why was this?
No idea why.
The first theory has to do with fairies. Basically, the belief in fairies.
And over there, I'm very flamboyant and theatrical. Ooh, look at the light. Oh my goodness. Over on TikTok, I'm very flamboyant and theatrical, whereas here on YouTube, I try to be a little bit more down to earth. So yes, let's dive into this topic. Are the Welsh gods actually gods? Let's begin with a little bit of a briefing on what are Welsh gods. Who are the Welsh gods? A lot of people have come onto my videos recently and gone, when you talk about Welsh gods, don't you mean Celtic gods rather than Welsh? And the answer to that is yes and no. The Welsh gods are Celtic gods. They are Celtic deities. But they're not part of a Celtic pantheon. There is no such thing as a Celtic pantheon. I don't know where this idea stems from. This idea that there's one homogeneous Celtic pantheon. I think it's the same issue as thinking that there's one homogeneous Celtic culture. There's no such thing as one singular Celtic culture. You know, Celtic is an umbrella term that encapsulates so many varieties of cultures and traditions and practices and people. So it's not as neatly compartmentalized as we like to believe it is. And it's the same thing for the Welsh deities, the Celtic deities. They're not just Celtic, they're Welsh. They're very much Welsh, and they are very much different to the gods of Ireland and Scotland and the Gaulish deities and any of the deities from other Celtic nations. They're very much different, despite having very many similarities in many ways as well. There are deities that are cognate with some of the ones from Ireland in Wales. But no, they are not just Celtic deities. They are very much Welsh deities because there is no such thing as one singular Celtic pantheon. So I work predominantly with, well, I wouldn't say work with, I call upon and sometimes work alongside as a witch, the Celtic Welsh deities, the Welsh Celtic deities. And many of the deities that I call to are deities such as Ceridwen, Rhiannon, Gwydion, Gwyn ap Nudd, Llyr. All these entities, they stem from Welsh mythology, Welsh folklore, and Welsh legend. So some of them come from the Mabinogi, the Mabinogion, you might know it as. Overall, they come from a variety of tales and legends. Ceridwen especially comes from, Hanes Taliesin, the Book of Taliesin, the poetry of Taliesin. And Taliesin is another entity that a lot of people do pray to, venerate, and work with. Now, a lot of Celtic pagans and witches these days do venerate these entities as deities. They see them as gods. The big question among many, many people is from all walks of life, not just within the pagan circles, is are they actually deities? Are they actually gods? Because it's not very clear in the mythology that they are deities. But if you are studying, say, the Mabinogi from an academic perspective, and only an academic perspective, not a religious perspective, then you might struggle with the idea of the characters from the Mabinogi being referred to as gods by pagans, you might struggle with that concept entirely. And I mean, I've met people who aren't academics, who are just people who grew up in Wales. I remember having a full-on conversation with someone once when I was in my teens, growing up in a Welsh-speaking area of Wales. A lot of people have grown up with the legends of the Mabinogi, with characters such as Branwen, Bendigeidfran, Ceridwen, and Rhiannon. They've grown up with these stories because I did. I grew up with them. I went to a Welsh school. I had an all-Welsh education. And so I grew up with these stories, and they were part of who I was. And nobody, when we were taught them in school, when we were read the stories, when we did plays, when we went to watch theatrical interpretations of these stories, nobody ever referred to them as gods. Nobody ever sat down with us and said, Rhiannon is the goddess of horses. That never happened. She was just a princess. And so, yes, a lot of people do struggle with the concept of them being deities. So let's dive into, are they actually deities? So, first and foremost, jumping straight off of what I just said, in the mythology that we would read today, if you would read any translation today, you will never see them referred to as gods in those translations. Unless it's a version of the Mabinogi that's been translated by a pagan. For example, if you were to read From the Cauldron Born by Christopher Hughes, there might be some references to Taliesin and Ceridwen as deities, because he's a pagan, because he's a Celtic pagan, and he works with and venerates those deities. Whereas if you were to read more academic texts or non-pagan literature surrounding them, they will not refer to them as deities. They are warriors, princes, princesses, kings, queens, knights. They're all these different things, but not gods. Despite that, however, there are many hints within the legends and the myths to the idea that they're not quite human. I mean, especially with characters such as Rhiannon, for example. Rhiannon is, at surface level, quite mundane. There's nothing spectacular about her, but she has these abilities, these magical abilities that kind of solidify her identity as being a non-human. She's not quite human. She can ride a horse and ride it going faster than any other men riding their horses galloping at full speed, while she looks as though she's going no faster than a trot. If that's not magical, I don't know what is. And that's just one example of the aspects of Rhiannon that come across as magical in the tales. And that's how a lot of academics kind of look at these things. They see them as magical, they don't see them as divine. Whereas as pagans, we would see it as divine. And it is true that there's very little to no archaeological evidence to prove that there was ever a cult of Rhiannon or a cult of Gwydion. There's not that much evidence, archaeologically speaking, historically speaking, academically speaking, to prove that these entities were ever worshipped as deities historically, like in the pre-Christian era of Wales. There is no evidence to prove so. But in saying that as well, we have to remember that the stories as we know them were translated by monks and were presented to us in manuscripts that were collected by monks that were not pagan. I'll just point that out. And so, of course, they would have written the manuscripts with their own biases, with their own agenda inside. And I mean, I'm not one of those people who sits here thinking, oh my goodness, Christianity ruined Wales and how dare they, because Christianity did a lot to preserve a lot of the cultures and traditions of Wales. If it wasn't for the monks and the monasteries, we wouldn't know about the Mabinogi now. And I know a lot of people counter that and say, yes, but if it wasn't for Christianity, we wouldn't have lost it. But you don't know that. We might still have lost it. We might still have lost it despite there being no Christianity, because Wales as a culture shared their stories through an oral tradition. So it's very easy to lose things when it's only shared by word of mouth. So, I mean, I'm very thankful to the monks of old ancient Wales for preserving these legends as they are, because now it gives us something to look at. So we have to remember that these legends were preserved by monks. But where do they come from? I mean, they must have come from somewhere. And the general consensus is that these legends are from the oral tradition. They were stories that have been passed down throughout Wales for centuries and centuries, and hundreds and hundreds of years before Christianity even. So is it possible that a lot of these characters, a lot of these stories could have stemmed from a body of mythology that predates Christianity? Of course it is. Of course it's possible. Of course it's absolutely possible. And I mean, I think it's very interesting that a lot of the characters in the Mabinogi seem very similar to a lot of the deities found in various Celtic cultures throughout Europe. So, for example, to give one example, Rhiannon and Epona. You know, Epona is a goddess of horses, and Rhiannon and Epona have a very many similarities between them in the way that they are presented to us. That correlation with horses, and also of her being, so connected to sovereignty and the landscape. There's so much parallel between a lot of the characters in the Mabinogi and Celtic deities. So a lot of these characters might actually stem from older archetypes that existed in pre-Christian Wales. We don't know. Maybe they did. And perhaps their names weren't Rhiannon and Gwydion and Hye and Hir. And, maybe their names were very, very different. But something, some aspect, some core memory of these old archetypal entities has been preserved via the myths and legends that we have now. And so, of course, a lot of Celtic pagans and witches venerate these entities as goddesses and gods. And that brings us to the topic of apotheosis. The topic of apotheosis is so interesting to me. So apotheosis is the process of making something divine. It's this idea that something can literally be made divine after years and years of veneration and worship and devotion from communities and groups. And of course, we cannot ignore the fact that so many people view these entities now as deities. There are so many people who work with Arianrhod and Ceridwen and Taliesin and Hir, Lleich Augafes. There are so many people who work with these entities. Gwyn ap Nudd, for example, is a huge aspect of the cultural consciousness right now, worldwide, not just in Wales. And so with that many people worshipping these entities as gods, surely they have become gods. If they weren't originally, they have become gods. And I mean, the characters in the Mabinogi, these entities that we look at, they are the very embodiment of the landscape. I mean, not only are they seen as gods by Celtic pagans like me, but they're also part of the culture of Wales, even today, even among Christians, even among non-pagans. I think a lot of people assume that these tales are purely mythological pagan elements of Wales, but they're not. They're very much ingrained into the culture, at least where I was from. I grew up in Aberfraw, and Aberfraw is literally where Matholwch and Branwen, in the story of Branwen, got married. I grew up in a landscape that was filled to the brim with so much folklore and myth and legend. These characters were such an integral part of my upbringing that I know them as part of Wales. When I look at them, I see Wales. So, of course, in any way, they have become literal archetypal entities that are specifically tied to the culture and heritage of Wales. So apotheosis, definitely, they've definitely become divine. They're important. They're cultural symbols and elements, even beyond the world of paganism and witchcraft. And I think what I want to end this video on is a note that also we have to remember that antiquity does not equal authenticity. Within the world of Celtic paganism, especially when you try and go within the route of reconstructionism and such, there's this huge obsession with the older something is, the more authentic it must be. And the more modern something is, the less authentic it is. And that is a load of absolute rubbish, in my eyes. I'm sorry, but it just is. It's just a load of rubbish. I don't understand how something being new implies that it's bad. Do you know what's new? Filtered water that isn't filthy. I'm quite happy with it. She says while drinking Coca-Cola. We all have our nasty habits. Antiquity does not equal authenticity. Just because something is antiquated and old does not make it any more authentic or any better than something that's new and modern. So just because the idea, and I'm not saying that the idea of the Welsh gods being gods is a modern concept. I'm not saying it. I'm saying it could be a potential theory surrounding them. But even if that was the case, even if they are a modern concept, they're still authentic. They're still part of so many people's practices. And I mean, I feel something. When I sit in front of my cauldron and I say, O Ceridwen, mam yr awen, ceidwad y pair, I feel something. I shiver a little inside, and everything awakens within me, and it's almost as though I feel like she's there with me, and she's watching me, and she's holding on to my shoulders, and she's dragging me into the experiences that I need to have to evolve. You know, I feel it deep inside me. That feeling is real. It's valid. And so I refuse to believe that it's nothing. So to me, they are gods, and they are goddesses. And I've experienced enough with them to view them as such. But I also understand why a lot of people might find it difficult to accept and acknowledge them as deities. Now, what do you think? I really want to know. What do you think about this topic? Tell me in the comments down below. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you disagree with anything I said? Do you agree? Do you think that it's interesting? Have you ever considered this even? I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people who don't even consider this, who just instantly assume they must be gods because they're part of the old legends and tales of Wales. They must be from something pre-Christian, and they must be deities, and that there's no question about it. But, I mean, it's something that I think about a lot, but it never discredits these entities as gods in my eyes. Whether it's a modern construct or it's something that is old and ancient and harkening back to ancient archetypes, to me it's still very much authentic and valid, and they are very much powerful spiritual and magical allies to work with, and to venerate, and to honor, and to pray to. They're very much powerful, potent, archetypal entities that are tied to the cultural landscape of Wales and to the natural landscape of Wales too. So many of the stories take part within the natural landscape of Wales. Yeah. I really hope I made sense today. And I'm back, by the way. If you've made it this far, thank you so very much for watching the video all the way to the end. I am back. I'm going to be making videos more frequently, hopefully. Crossing my fingers. I will get better at making videos when I actually have a camera. And I'm saving up for a camera, so we'll get there. We'll get there. In the meantime, if you would like to support me, then click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, comment down below, even if it's just great. Just something small. Just give me a comment. I want to see that people enjoy what I'm putting out there, because I'm an attention whore. Follow me on my socials. I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, everywhere. I have a book coming out soon. I can't wait to tell you more about that. I signed a contract with Llewellyn Worldwide. Isn't that wonderful? Can't wait. I can't tell you much at the minute. At the minute, but I will soon. Bendition swynol arnach I gyd. Magical blessings upon you all. Oh, by the way, I also have a Patreon. I have a Patreon. Woo! And while I'm at it, I'm actually going to thank my founding patrons, my lovely patrons who signed up with me. I've got 16 patrons, and I'm so glad that these people have decided that I'm good enough for them to support with real mortal money, real mortal human money. So thank you very much to Corey, Fragrant Pages, Hester, Isabel, Janine, Molotov Chicken, Amanda, Jackie, Stephanie, Lucy, Nothing Nobody. Okay. Tammy, Gwyn, Kimberly, Vivian, and Judith. Thank you so much for becoming founding patrons, people who joined my Patreon before I even really started talking about my Patreon. So if you'd like to support me on my Patreon, it means that you will help me buy a camera so that I can make better content. It means that you can help me make more better content. More better content. Wow. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I haven't blabbered on too much. And honestly, I am very curious what you think about this whole topic. So get to commenting. I see you not commenting. How dare you comment? A goodbye.